Awesome. So, hey everyone, I've been shouting out like who's been trickling in here, and I'm just want to let you know that I am so excited to be here. And the topic for today is going to be scaling your Next.js application on Vercel. As you can see, my name is Matt Jared, and I'm a sales engineer at Vercel. So I'm just going to dig right into this. Some housekeeping notes. If you have questions, go ahead and drop those into the Q&A. And we'll be able to answer those towards the end. We have, 15 minutes at the end where we can kind of dig into any questions that you have, and we'll be able to kind of chat about some of those things. And so anything that comes up where you're like, hey, I have a question about this, go ahead and drop that in. And we'll also have a contact form at the end. So it's like, hey, I want to go even deeper than what this question is. We'll have that available at the end as well. And also this will be recorded. So afterwards, what we're going to do is we're going to take this recording and we'll share it back out with everybody. So if there's something that you wanted to kind of dig in on or you're curious about, this is like we'll be able to kind of answer those questions. Cool. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get going. First off here, this is our agenda for today. So we're going to go over some intros. I know I mentioned I was in Austin and I was sweating on Saturday and I was freezing cold last night. So we'll talk about, we're not going to talk anymore about the weather, I promise. We're going to talk about Vercel. We're going to give a big overview on Vercel. We're going to kind of dig in on a simple Next.js application and talk about how we can scale that out. And how are we going to scale that? We're going to talk about accelerating our development process and monitoring and troubleshooting problems. It's kind of going to be like the focus of what we're going to be into today. So let's dig into intros. First off, about me, I'm a full stack developer. I've said this several times, but I'm located in Austin. It is 11:05 my time. I don't know where it is you are in the world today if you're watching this sometime in the future, but I super appreciate your time to kind of join on and chat about some of these things with us. So far in my career, I've worked with a number of different startups, as well as very large companies. So, like, why should you listen to me talk about these things? Throughout my career, like I said, I worked with a number of different startups, most notably with Techstars and with a company called Cratejoy here in Austin, where I started very small companies. There's two or three people. And then I slowly have grown out to be in bigger organizations as a developer. So I was at Techstars for a summer, working with a number of those different companies that came through. And then I worked at a company called The Zebra. If you go to thezebra.com, it is a car insurance marketplace. When I walked in the door there as an engineer, I was the sixth person in the door, and I left, and there were 60 people. So that scale from we have two or three folks in a room, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to build, to we have two or three teams simultaneously building things all the time, all day, every day. It was quite the jump. So I have a little bit of experience on that side. And then when I went from the 60 engineers at the Zebra to 600 at Atlassian, that was an even bigger jump to sort of see what it's like to go ahead and scale beyond just I have a couple people in a room to there are thousands of people all around the world who rely on this software that we're building, which is why I've come over to Vercel to sort of like help folks who might be in the room today, who are interested in scaling themselves, scaling the team, and learning more about how Next can kind of help facilitate that along with Vercel. So if you have any questions about some of the code that we have today, where you're kind of wanting to see what that looks like, if you go to my GitHub, we're going to open source everything that we do. So github.com/Matt Jared, and we'll be able to go from there. So like I said a minute ago, our goals for today's talk are going to be deploying a site with Next and Vercel, kind of give an overview of both Next and Vercel. And then we're going to talk about how Vercel helps accelerate our development process. And then we're going to monitor and do some troubleshooting with our application. And then, like I said earlier, we're going to answer some questions, open it up for everybody. Awesome. So let's dig into what actually is Vercel. So we're going to dig into the Vercel overview. So I'm going to read straight from the slide here, and then we're going to dig into what I'm actually saying. So Vercel is the front-end cloud that gives every team the tools to develop, preview, and ship at the moment of inspiration. And you can see to the right here, we have a number of Next.js customers, or Vercel customers, excuse me, who are using Vercel every single day. And there are developers on the one side who have an idea and they ship at the moment of inspiration. So they build stuff. So when somebody asks me, what does Vercel do? What is Vercel? Vercel is the best way to build and deploy a web application. And the way that we do that, like how is a front end cloud? Like what actually makes you different than some other cloud or some other service? And there's two sides of this that I really like to call out. And this is kind of what we're built on is the managed infrastructure side and the developer experience side. So like what is a front end cloud? This is the two pieces that sort of make this up. So on the managed infrastructure side, this is going to be, we're going to go ahead and deploy this out into the world to our edge network without you having to think about how it's going to be like actually delivered to your end users. So you're not going to have to think about scaling. You're not going to have to really worry about security, and you're going to be able to just observe your application as you go through the development process. So this last line here is we're going to deliver high performance dynamic experiences on robust infrastructure. So when you think about a cloud, oftentimes what you think about is you have to like do a lot of like configuration, and you have to sort of know a bunch of things going into it. But with Vercel and using the front end cloud is we want to sort of like remove all of that headache of having to figure all those things out for you. We want to just help you focus. Let's go back a second. We want to help you develop, preview, and ship at the moment of inspiration. Not we're going to help you develop, preview, and ship after you spend a whole bunch of time configuring things, right? So this is kind of like what we're trying to do is we're trying to just like get code out into the world as fast as possible. Okay, the other side of this is when we're going to get code out into the world as fast as possible on our edge network, we're going to deploy that and we're going to scale that for you. We also want to make it really fun and easy for you to deploy stuff and to build stuff yourself. So this is where our developer experience platform comes in. We're going to be efficient, and we're just going to have a lot of collaboration tools, which we'll dig into here in a minute. And we want to move fast with focus. So this is where we want to actually deploy things confidently. So with going back in my history of being a full stack dev here, is a lot of times when you're not confident with what's going to happen and you're hoping things are going to go out the door okay, and you're hoping that the team's going to be able to collaborate and work well together, it's not a very good strategy. So this is where our developer experience side of the front end cloud really shines and is really like makes life way easier for developers. And as we'll talk about in a second, it's more than just developers who can get it on the action. So I'm going to take a pause here. I'm going to grab a sip of water and we're going to start digging in on some Next.js stuff. So one thing that I want to talk about that I think would be really useful for everyone to kind of like think about here is on the Next.js side, the Next.js building blocks, some of us might be coming into this call and saying like, yeah, I love Vercel, I do all these different things with it, or yeah, I really love Next, I do all these different things with it. But sometimes we like kind of merge the two ideas of Next and Vercel to each other. So what I want to talk about is with Next and what we're going to be building today is one piece of the puzzle. Next can get deployed on any cloud, on any front-end cloud that you would think of. And Vercel deploys over 37 front-end frameworks. So they're two separate things, but they work tremendously well together when paired. So we are at Vercel the creators and maintainers of Next.js, and we have a fantastic, developer flow, which is what we'll illustrate here in a second. But that's not the only framework that we support. If you're thinking about Remix, or you're thinking about Gatsby, or you're thinking about Nuxt or something like that, what you'll be able to do is go ahead and deploy that with all the same velocity and all that same confidence that you're going to get by deploying Next. And the same is true is if they, hey, Vercel doesn't work for me, I want to use some other thing, that's totally fine too. So there are two separate kind of pieces to this puzzle. So what we're going to do today is we're going to dig in and we're actually going to build a site with Next 14. It's going to be using the app router. We won't dig into server components and server actions very much. But this is something that's going to be available to us right out of the box. And since my code will be open source, you can take this template for us and you can actually start going into React server components and server actions next. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to pop out of this screen here and you should see my Vercel. So we are now entering into live demo space here. So we are now looking at my Vercel. When you look at my Vercel, there's probably it might kind of like jump out that there's a lot going on. So let's orient ourselves to the screen really quick. The first is each of these squares that you're going to see in the middle of this page are going to be all of my projects. So you can see when I was practicing for this, I have my super fake demo, fake live demo, and I have an observability project, a dashboard, different things like that. So when you hop into your Vercel, you're going to see all these different projects pulled into here. So how do you move around between a project? What's the difference between a project and like what's the difference between one or two projects? What's going on in there? This is where we can look at the top level here and the inside of this top navigation where we can kind of move around between things. But the first thing that always catches my eye is this giant black box over here, and this is add new. So when we think back to we're going to create at the moment of inspiration, let's get inspired, right? Let's think about something that we want to build and let's make it right now. And let's see how fast we can go from inspiration to delivering an actual site. Okay. So when I add new, I'm going to create a new project. And in this field, what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to have two options. The first is I'm going to be able to import a Git repository. So if I have a bunch of code that's already been working before, so this is one of the benefits of being on a front-end cloud. Let's say I'm on some other different service provider and I have my code running. I've been up and running for a few years, but I want to give Vercel a try. There's really no configuration that you have to do besides importing in your Git repository. Just click a button, say, here's my code, Vercel, I want you to go ahead and deploy this. And what's great about this in Vercel side is we have a concept called framework defined infrastructure. So you can see these little Next.js logos right here. If I were to use something else, Vercel would just automatically know what framework I'm using and configure itself around that and go ahead and deploy that off into the world. I'm most familiar with Next. That's the subject matter for the webinar today. So we're going to stick in Next.js land. But if you're like dedicated to Svelte or you're like super interested in Nuxt or Remix or whatever it is, Vercel is going to go ahead and deploy that for you as well with no extra configuration. So that's where the framework defined infrastructure idea comes from. So front end cloud framework defined infrastructure, that's a lot of words, are two of the pillars of kind of what you're going to get when you work with Vercel. Okay, so like I said, you can import something here, but we were just inspired to do something new. It's webinar day. It's a beautiful day. Let's go ahead and make something new. Again, Next is the subject matter for today. You could use a different service. So now I'm prompted to create a Git repository. And when I want to create a Git repository, I can do this with the three different services right now. So GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. As mentioned before, I worked at Atlassian, so I worked with the Bitbucket team very closely for many years. If I were to choose to use that today, I could. Same with GitLab. But today we're just going to use GitHub. And when we use GitHub, I'm going to be prompted to put in the Git scope, which is my personal GitHub, and which is what I linked to earlier. This is going to be a private Git repository. So for today, what we're going to call this is Next.js Awesome Site. And this is going to be our new repository that we're going to work with. So let me go ahead and create this repository. And what's going on behind the scenes is we have our built template code from Next.js, and we're going to pass that over to GitHub. And we're going to say, hey, GitHub, I just want you to host all of this code and do your normal thing. And you go ahead and you hold my commits and my PRs in place. My development team is going to be using this the same way that we normally would. It's just a repo, right? That's going to sit there. When we do that, Vercel comes in and says, every single time there's a commit, a PR, or a branch, we're going to follow that along and we're going to deploy that off to Vercel. So this is kind of moving into when we come back to my presentation here and we talk about accelerating our development process. This is where this is really going to shine. So we're going from I have this idea to I have a repo to I have Vercel, and inside of Vercel, every single time I go ahead and commit, there's going to be a deploy. And you can see I got confetti, everybody's happy. And what does the confetti actually mean? This is what's really neat, is we actually have a site up and running. Okay, so Next.js Awesome Site up Vercel.app. We've done this. It took us, like 2 or 3 minutes. We go ahead and drop this into the chat for everyone to see. Actually, I'll put this in as a follow-on for you guys so you can take a look at this. And you can go to this yourself right now. So like I said a second ago, every single time there's a commit or every single time there's a branch or a PR, Vercel knows about that. It sits on top of GitHub and it can actually build these things out for us. This is really powerful. So let's talk about actually accelerating this. Let's talk about what this actually looks like, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into my Git repository. I'm going to go straight into GitHub. I'm going to clone this down. And what we want to do is we want to actually start building this. So I've got my terminal open here. Like I said, I've been a full stack developer for many years. Let's go ahead and get this going. Let me do a git clone. And I'm going to go cd Next.js Awesome Site. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open this up into VS Code. I've got Next.js Awesome Site. This is working so well. I'm so excited about this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into my terminal. Okay. And again, as a developer, we're not going to YOLO this straight to main. We want to make a branch. Okay. I'm going to git checkout B. And we're going to call this, I'm going to prefix this with my name, just for conversation's sake. And we're just going to do demo branch. Okay. So this is typical things that you do as a developer. You're building, you want to go make a change to this. Let's go back to our application here. Like what I want to do is I want to update this headline. Okay. This is, it's very simple, example, but what we want to do is we want to just make a change to this headline. So what I can do is I can actually go into here, my Next.js Awesome Site, and I'm going to go to page.tsx. And we're going to call this, let's get started by editing. So I know that I need to actually escape this. And this needs to be an amp. Is it an amp or is it, I forget what this is. So, but I know that I need to escape this. Let's just put this in here right now. Let's just kind of see what happens. I'm on a demo branch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to git add. Okay. Typical stuff This is exactly as we would do things as a developer. I'm going to like new headline, and I'm going to do a git push origin to this branch. Okay. So I've pushed off to a branch, and as you can see, GitHub has seen this immediately. And what we want to do is let's make a PR. Let's do it. Okay. And here's where we're going to say like new branch. All right, let's say new headline. Sorry. I'm going to say awesome new headline. So I'm going to go ahead and create this pull request. Sweet. Okay. The very first thing that I see is Vercel sitting on top of this. Okay, wow, the Vercel bot immediately has come in, and it is giving me updates right away on what's going on. Okay, so it says I'm ready. I'm going to inspect this. What does this actually mean? Okay, so what this has done is it's brought us back into Vercel, and it's saying, here is your actual deployment. Your deployment is actually getting built right now. It took you 23 seconds. So what's really cool about this is I haven't had to build any YAML files. I haven't had to build any TOML files. I haven't had to touch a package JSON. I haven't had to touch any dependencies. I haven't had to really think at all. I've just kind of done what I've clicked some buttons and started building code. So when we go back to, we want to create and we want to deploy at the moment of inspiration, this is what we're talking about. We don't have to think about instrumenting a whole bunch of things. We don't have to think about what the service is or how it works on this branch or how it works on that branch. And I'm already building. And I'm actually already getting the CI/CD in place here where I can actually see what's going on. I can make some changes here and actually see what's happening inside of my build pipelines. So the next piece of this that I find really, really interesting is I can see these two domains here. And then below that, I can see my source. Okay, so my source, we know this. This is going to go to our GitHub. That's fine. Everybody knows about the new headline. This was my change. But what's really neat are these two domains. So this is where we're going to start involving some other folks in our organization. And I can see this magical black box here just kind of showed up. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us the ability to have preview comments. So what I can do here is I can actually go mention my colleague Alex, who's actually on the call right now. Hey, Alex, what do you think about this? And what's going to happen is Alex is going to get a notification. He's going to get a message that says, Matt Jarrett has messaged you on this platform, on Vercel, on this branch. Let's go get him a response. So what we've had to do in the past when we're working on the developer experience side is we've had to go and work against other developers and say, hey, I'm taking staging now so I can go test with Alex. And then now that I get staging, then I go have to make sure Alex has the time to do this. And if he doesn't, then we have to take a bunch of screenshots and we have to post something into Slack, or we have to like schedule time where we actually can say, hey, nobody push anything right now. We're just going to use staging in this case. But at Vercel, if you're using Vercel to deploy your application, that all goes away. What we're going to do is we're going to give you ephemeral preview environments that are immutable. So let me go back. That's a lot of words, a lot of like 5-syllable words there, right? So ephemeral preview environments that are immutable. So what this is every single time there's a commit, there's going to be a new branch or there's going to be a new deployment that happens, and it's never going to go away. So what I can see here is I'm going to go to my deployments, and I can actually see my original deploy, which was done by GitHub. GitHub did that initial deploy for me because it committed that off. But then I made my new headline branch, and I can actually see that this is never going to go away. So if I were to have a bunch of different versions of this headline that Alex and I wanted to go back and forth on, we could do that. And we would have an ephemeral preview environment for this. Oh, perfect. Alex has said, let's go. That's great. Perfect. So let's go ahead and resolve this. But I can actually see something went wrong. Okay. This is right here. Oh, okay. So let's go back to our code. I thought it was an amp, but it's actually an apos. All right. So this is where we're saying, okay, we made a mistake. And now what we need to do is quickly just build out a new branch and just go with it. So instead of having to now say like, okay, we have to do a hotfix, we have to stop with staging, we have to fight each other again to try and get like this preview environment working or to have staging working, or we're just going to deploy and hope that it works. I know in this case, we're just changing an ampersand to an apostrophe. That's a little different, but imagine yourself in a world where there's a lot going on. So this is the piece of, well, this is how we're going to accelerate our development team, is we're going to be able to accelerate our actual process of doing stuff. We don't have to fight other developers. We don't have to spend a whole bunch of time thinking about things. We can just push stuff and we can just move forward. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this fixed. And one thing I want to talk about really quickly, if you're coming from just a vanilla React land or create React app, or maybe just you're thinking about going full stack or you're going serverless, what I want to talk about here is, and this is coming back to we were talking about the building blocks of our application. We were talking about server components, server actions, and route handlers. So this is a different way that we're going to talk about moving into the next piece of the demo, where we're going to talk about monitoring and troubleshooting some problems. So what we just went over here, let me do my slideshow really quick. What we just did here was our developer experience platform. We did preview environments. We talked about CI/CD. We did preview comments. What we're going to do next is we're going to bring in a Next.js feature, and we're going to monitor and troubleshoot some problems. So as our application were to be more dynamic, and we were to possibly think about maybe building out a SaaS, and we were to possibly maybe go from just client-side React or client-side JavaScript to full-stack JavaScript, this is where what we're going to do is we're going to build out a new route handler. So inside of here, our application, like I said, we're going to change the page.js. What I did is let's get started by editing. I have a change here, so I'm going to do a get status. I have this page. What I want to do next is I have my app directory. And inside of here, these two pages are going to run my whole front end of my application. So I'm going to have access to client components or server components on the front end side. But what I love about working with Next is I can actually I'm going to create what's called like I said, a route handler. So I'm going to call this route.ts. And when I have a route.ts, and I have a little bit of some code pre-written here that I'm just going to drop in, and this might look familiar to you. What I'm doing now is I'm accessing a serverless function. Let me pull up my code a little bit and zoom in just so you guys can see this. So what I have here is this. Now I'm starting to instantiate a serverless function. So if I were to go to my application, which we'll do here in a second after we do this deploy, I actually can make a GET request on this. I can make a POST request on this. I can make a patch request, whatever action verb that you want to use. And now we're going from a bunch of client-side JavaScript to now we're using server-side JavaScript as well. And we're going to actually be making a full stack application. So we're going to go from just front end with some simple changes to now full stack without having to think about really anything. We're just going to drop this in here. We're going to see if it happens, see how it goes, and see if it works. Okay. So just to kind of keep us on task and to speed things up a little bit, what I have is an alias. So I have go. So that's going to be get add, get commit, and get push. And when I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a random NBA player from an API that I have stored. I scraped basketball reference. I've got the names of all basketball players ever. Drop that into a KV store, and I just pull that out for my commit message here. So that way we can just kind of move quickly through this piece. That's a side quest that we'll get into another time. So what I've done is I have done another deploy. And what I want to do is I want to go back into my GitHub and let's get this merged in. Actually see what's going on here. So I have my pull request, very simple stuff. I'm going to go into my new headline, and I can see that I had one comment before that was resolved. So remember I mentioned Alex, and he was cool with what we had. Oh, and we changed we have the history of all of our application logic here, or not our application logic, excuse me, of our comments. And we can see, let's get started by editing what's changed. And one thing I want to call out really quickly about our ephemeral preview environments. So I visit this preview, you can see that my URL has changed. And what I want to show you guys is a commit URL. So you can see these two domains. Our first domain is for our branch. So you can see Next.js, awesome site. This substring is get Matt Jarrett demo branch, and then I have the name of my project. And this is going to be for my branch. So if I have many commits coming through, I'm just going to follow a branch as my preview environment. But if I want to see just one commit, this is actually really cool. So I can actually go to Next.js, awesome site, and then this little substring here, this is actually my commit SHA. So every single time I have a commit, I'm going to be able to see a different version of this. So this is my older commit SHA here. Let's hop out of this. Let's go back to our deployments. We want to get to GitHub and merge some stuff in. Let me go back to Next.js awesome site. I'm going to go to deployments. Looks like this is ready. And let's just jump right into here. And I see that my build is green. Vercel did all that it needed to do. It assigned me some domains. I'm going to hop back into my PR, and I'm going to go ahead and merge this. And when I merge this, Vercel has approved of all this. When I merge this, I'm going to go straight into main, and that's going to kick off a production deploy. So this flow of I've made something, I've made a branch, I'm merging it back into main is exactly what we do all day as developers. And this is exactly how it's going to work with Vercel to allow you to have those preview environments. Okay, so we've done all this. We've got about 5 minutes to go. As a reminder, if you have any questions, drop those into Q&A. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up and we're going to talk about why we actually dropped in that route.ts and what that actually looks like. So let's go back to our Next.js awesome site. We have our merge from our pull request actually already deployed. So if you go to our project, and you can go to this right now, just go ahead and give us a refresh. Our production site has actually changed to let's get started by editing, and we have the correct apostrophe. We made a little bit of a mistake there by putting an ampersand in, but that's not the case anymore. So if I were to have made a mistake where maybe this were to have broken, and instead of it just being an ampersand, what we would get is our build would have failed. That's kind of cool. So you can actually go through your deployments and see where things have failed and things of that nature. But we're a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to run into moving us into the last piece of this is monitoring and troubleshooting problems. Okay, so what I did earlier was I added in let's go back to our code and talk about this really briefly. What I added in was a logger directory with a route.ts. And when I do that, I move our front end application, our front end Next.js, application that's using React, and now being a full stack application. Okay, and how do we actually test to see what's going on here? I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop into Logger. And you can actually see, I have a little plugin here that's going to help me format this JSON. And what's going on is we're calling this Logger endpoint. And when we have a Logger endpoint, this is actually a serverless function beneath the hood. And it actually goes off and retrieves this message. And what I want to talk about really briefly is the difference between, a server full API and a serverless API. And this is where using Next.js and any other front-end framework that's using the similar structure, along with Vercel, is really powerful, because what we're going to do is we're actually going to omit the idea that we need DevOps and that we need to have a load balancer, or that we need to have an API gateway, or that we need to have a bunch of other different things instrumented. Because what we're going to do is we're going to have a serverless function, and this serverless function is going to live on a machine in the front-end cloud, and when it's requested, it's going to spin up and respond to that request. But what we can do by being on a front-end cloud is, let's say millions of people have just requested this exact API endpoint. So your application has done a number of different things that require a bunch of different people to interact with serverless functions behind the scenes. What we're going to do is we're going to scale up and scale down without having to do anything. So that's what Vercel is going to handle for us. And by being on a serverless function, by using a serverless function and by being on a front-end cloud such as Vercel, it's going to give us the ability to scale off into the world without having to worry about load balancers, without having to budget for traffic, without having to worry about anything like that. We're just going to go ahead and scale right along with you. And that's by nature, by using serverless functions, that's what's really powerful about this, is we have a lot of fast development and experience ideas that kind of go into there. But on our infrastructure side, we're going to scale along with you. So the serverless functions are going to go up and down in terms of how many requests that come to them, regardless of how many requests come to them. So it's actually really neat to kind of think about. We don't have to worry about any other instrumentation stuff. Not only do we get this deployed and off into the world, but it's also going to grow with us as we go through this process of growing our application. So one thing that I do want to call out is, what does this actually look like? I'm hitting this a couple times. And what I want to do is I want to go to my Vercel, and I want to go to MJ Software Vercel, and our Next.js awesome site, like we talked about at the jump. I'm going to go ahead and click into this. And what's interesting, we're talking about going up and down. We're scaling, we're not scaling, and things like that. But what actually is going on behind the scenes here? What actually is this? And what I want to do is I want to hop into my logs here. And I can actually see what actually is going on here. Let me click into here. And this was my most recent request. Okay, so this came in at 11:30. So this was the first time I actually hit this. So if you guys are out there at home or in the office or wherever, if you go ahead and get this, what Vercel is doing here, without having to instrument anything, it's actually taking that Logger API endpoint and it's tracking all of this that's coming through, and it's actually providing a log that's coming through. So this is why it's called Logger. This can be called anything that you want. You don't have to use Logger as a logging service, I know, but what I just have here is just a very simple application that has, it's just responding with this message, right? So you can use a serverless function for virtually anything. This is a very simple, slimmed down version. But let's say we have millions of different users that are coming through in dozens or thousands or however many number of serverless functions. What I can do on the left-hand side is start filtering down where those serverless functions are coming from. And then in the middle, I can actually see what our serverless function traffic looks like. And then when I click onto this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go kind of double click into this actual specific request. I can see the time, I can see the status code, I can see the host. So if I have possibly, maybe a number of different hosts, and then I can actually see the level, I can see the environment was production, and I can see that the cache was pre-rendered. So you can see if it's a cache hit or a cache miss. And these last two pieces here are really neat. So I've been talking about our ephemeral preview environments and how they're attached to deployments. You can actually do that same thing. What's really neat about this is this actually travels with you throughout your time when you're using Vercel. I can actually open this deployment and I can actually see the last time I made a deployment. And I can actually see like, oh yeah, this deployment came from this branch here when I actually merged this in. So the difference is previously what we would have to do, and if you're on a more like obfuscated kind of setup, you have a number of different things that are going on. You have to go back and find a commit SHA. You have to take that SHA, go to Jira or Linear or Trello or Asana or whatever it is, figure out who did that code, do some Git blame work and see what happened there. What happened? Like, why is this broken? Why did you make this change? And like figure all that out. But with Vercel, we kind of just omit that altogether and we go straight to, okay, this is broken because this deployment is broken. It's introducing all these errors. Let me go back to this deployment and I can see what happened there. I can see what the changes were immediately instead of having to fight a bunch of different things. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we have about 10 minutes to go. I know we're at 11:35. I'm going to go and open up our QA, and I can walk through inside of our, if you take those into the Q&A area, and I'm going to be looking to the right on my external monitor here to see this. I'm going to answer any questions that come through. So let's see here. Okay, Ken has asked a question. How to prevent to scale middleware invocations for auth checks. So this is so I'll answer this one here. So with Vercel, what you're going to be able to get is this is a really useful. Let's do Edge functions overview, Edge middleware overview. What we have here, and let's look at this a little bit closer. So when we talk about our Edge network and where this gets deployed to, this is actually where all of your Vercel code gets deployed to, and this is like the illustration of the request chain. So when a request comes in from a browser, what I have is I immediately am going to see the Edge middleware first with Vercel, and this is kind of digging in to a little bit of kind of inside baseball stuff, so we can talk about this a little bit more later. But what I want to illustrate here is on the Edge middleware is where oftentimes we're going to use this to check auth. So inside of middleware, we're going to say like, hey, who is this for auth? Like, who is this person? Are they auth or not? Like, do they exist in our account? And then we'll sort of like funnel them off into different experiences from there. So the way that you can actually scale this is actually caching that, like this person is in there, and also to say like every single time that this like there's a user that comes into this middleware, let's actually, instead of doing it for a whole entire application, let's maybe just do it for like one component. And that one component is our header, and that header is then going to cascade down our authentication. So the concept of that and the idea of partial pre-rendering, I think is something to look into some more. I want to get to some other questions on this, but this is kind of like an illustration of what we would do is we would say, hey, we have a redirect. Hey, we have our Edge middleware. Inside of our Edge middleware, we want to see what our auth, like what's going on with this person. Are they auth or not? And if they are, then let's put them into this component flow. If they are not, then let's put them out of this component flow. And instead of doing auth checks on all of our components or all of our pages, let's maybe like scope it down to one component. And then we can cascade that down with props if it's like just our header component. So that's something to look into some more. We can dig into that if you wanted to file. I need to go finish. We just kind of talked about our monitoring piece, and what I'm going to do is jump into Q&A. But if you have any other further questions, if we don't get to your question, go ahead and fill something out in this form here. So vercel.com/contact/sales, and we'll be able to dig into that some more. Okay, cool. Next is, how do you handle the different version of page generated during ISR when scaled to multiple instances? So ISR is the idea of called incremental static regeneration. I saw a question earlier of like where actually is what's a good use of serverless functions, and that's ISR is a fantastic use of serverless functions. Where what we're going to do with ISR is instead of having to regenerate your whole entire application if it's a static site, what we're going to do is we're just going to regenerate the pieces of content that you need that have changed, and we're going to hydrate those components inside of your application that require that content. So instead of having to redo a whole deploy and send out a whole new version of your site, we're just going to send out pieces of content straight to your site. So how do you handle the different version of page generated during ISR when scaled to multiple instances? That's exactly what Vercel is going to do. And that's exactly where, like, this is something that we will just kind of handle for you. So this is where with ISR, let's say that you have a piece of content that's set up inside of Contentful or a CMS such as Sanity or something like that. And when you say, I have this new piece of content, I want to change the headline of something. I'm going to change the headline of something. Let me go back to this. I'm going to change my headline, and my headline in these 3 pages just relies on this. So this is where when you update that content in Contentful, there's going to be a webhook that you'll have to instrument, and that webhook will actually call to a regenerate API endpoint, which is going to be a regenerate serverless function, more or less. And what we're going to do is we're going to set that serverless function is going to say, hey, we need to invalidate the cache for these 3 pieces of headline content, and it's going to go cascade that down and rehydrate those components, but it's not going to touch any of your other content. So that would be something to look further into is just setting that up and see how that actually works at scale. At multiple projects, you'll just need to set up for multiple API endpoints that will do that regeneration for you. And again, go ahead to vercel.com/contact/sales. If you want to dig into that further, we can talk about that for your specific use case as well. Mark that was done. Just reading this question. Okay, so this one's really good. So I see I'm already building a project with Next.js and Vercel. One small problem that I ran into is to have either staging or production protected before I feel confident to open up my project to the public. At the moment, I'm using redirects in Vercel.json. Another possibility would be to use the paid Vercel function. Is there any other way to do that so I can see at least staging and production protected? No, I won't have a problem just pay for Vercel once our project is set up and running. Okay, great. Let's actually just do this. Let's protect this. Let's do this on the call. So what you'll do here, you're going to go into your Vercel. I'm inside of my Next.js awesome site. And if you go into settings, and I believe it is in deployment protection, which is right there. And what I can do is I can have Vercel authentication set up. And there's some rules around this depending on how your account setup is. But what we're saying here is if you were to enable this, you have to be inside of my Vercel account to be able to see this. So let's think back to when Alex was on and we were doing our preview comments. Let's imagine that this content's sensitive. We don't want any person on the internet to see this, but I just want Alex and I to see this and be able to collaborate. This is where I'll enable this, and it'll be Vercel authentication. This will also make it so like there's a limit on the robots.txt if you wanted to put into. So this is where our shareable links would be set up. Or sorry, excuse me. There's one where we're saying I need to go back in and double check that, but there's a world where we can like not index this on Google as well. And then we also have like old school password protection. So if I were to just put a password up on this site, let's just do this really quick. Let's just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to password protect our site. So what I'll do is I'll go to our Next.js awesome site, and I'm going to go to this in a incognito tab, and this should actually come through and tell me that I have my password up. I wonder if it didn't save. But this is how that will work, is if you go ahead and enable that password protection, it's going to be basic auth, and that's how it's going to block that off for you. So these 2 pieces are going to answer that question for you. Can you please give a real world, let me answer this. Can you please give a real world use case for serverless functions? So there's thousands of options that you have. So I actually, a great example would be like, let's instead of saying that this route.ts is just a success message, let's imagine that we're actually going to have a full stack SaaS application. And in our SaaS application, we're going to have users register. So inside of this is where we would handle inside of a serverless function. Someone would go ahead and work through like our serverless function to go ahead and run their auth and say like, okay, we're going to go talk with some other auth provider, and we're going to see what this user is, if they exist or not in this auth provider, and then we're going to go ahead and create an account for them. Another would be in that similar vein of using a SaaS application. If we were to like write to a database. So let's imagine that I had like a contact form on my site, and I wanted to go ahead and like take the user's information that they put into the form, and I want to send it off to a database or to a CMS or something like that. The way by which we're going to move that data from one place to the other is through a serverless function. So it's going to work the exact same way as any other traditional API that is in a serverful environment, but it's going to be in a serverless environment. So it's just going to be lower overhead, and then just like overall like easier to get up and running, since we're going to have these API endpoints built inside of Next just like this. Okay, done with that. Um, let's see, any advice around caching pages and reducing build times? Let's go ahead and answer this one live. So advice around caching pages, I would take a look at our nextjs.org. Um, and what we can do is we can talk about the cache, data fetching, caching, and revalidation. So the first idea that we have is, like I mentioned earlier, would be incremental static regeneration. So that's a fantastic way to start. And what I can do here is I can look into ISR. This is going to be set up on the pages router. So if you're on the pages router instead of the app router, ISR is going to be built in straight from there. And then on the app router, it's a little bit different of a setup. So this is all going to kind of like talk through that. So if you just Google, or if you look inside of the documentation, go to data fetching, caching, and revalidating. And the concept is, like I talked about a second ago, is I have content in one place. I only want to update the headline. I don't want to update the however many other pages of content that I have laying around. I just want this one headline to update. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep everything else static, and we're going to change just this piece. And that's where ISR comes in. So this is if I just do ISR and we do caching in Next.js. So this is going to be, there's some more advanced pieces of how to do this inside of the app router, which are all going to be here. And I'll actually really quick go to incremental static regeneration. And this is where we'll talk about that as well. So I can actually hop out of this 2 pages and I'll go to incremental static. There we go. So this pages router, and to flip back and forth, you'll go to the pages router or the app router. And this is what this looks like. So I have a blog post that only has one piece of this. I'll set up an API endpoint in Vercel, which will be my regenerate API endpoint. I'll call to that through a webhook inside of Contentful or some other CMS, whichever one it is. And that will say, hey, I need to just go update this content. And this is how we're going to go ahead and update that content. As for the other part of reducing build times, what are you doing all in your build? I would love to know that. Again, let's hop back over. For your particular use case, I'd love to talk more about that for vercel.com/contact/sales. There are different tiers of Vercel accounts. So you have the pro account, which I believe gives you 1 to 5 minutes for a deploy. And then if you go all the way up to, for a build, and then you can go all the way up to the enterprise account, which is going to be 45 minutes. So if your builds are larger than 45 minutes, that says to me you're doing like a lot of large static sites that you're making. And I wonder if there's a way that we can maybe make this dynamic. So let's talk a little bit more about your specific use case, but also like what is it that you're doing in builds? Are you doing like large test case where you're running like tons and tons of tests? So let me go back. The way to modify that is if you go into your project settings, let me turn this off, and I were to go to general, I can actually change what my builds are here. So I can override this from next build. So maybe if this is like running a bunch of different things inside of here, this might be an idea to like sort of like pull some of that down if you're like hitting that limit for whatever your account is right now. And then also consider trying to move some of those pages to be dynamic. Some ideas. And again, the best way to get that like really clear answer to that is to work with us on the sales side, and kind of like we can come up with kind of like monitor your account and kind of see what it actually looks like to partner with us on the enterprise side as well. So vercel.com/contact/sales. Okay. Okay, so this last one, I have ways of handling feature flags with ease in Next.js apps hosted on Vercel. So this is an awesome example here. So what I would say here, if we go back to our Edge middleware overview, this is where the Edge middleware is going to really be useful. So and this comes by default with every single account, you're going to have access to the Edge middleware. You can do middleware.ts or .js inside of your Next.js application. And every single time there's a request that comes through, we're going to have access inside of our middleware. And what's really cool about having access inside of our middleware is we can have access to things such as our Edge config. And I don't know if Edge config is actually inside of here. So what I have access to inside of here is this feature flag. It's like, where does that feature flag actually come from? This is actually really neat. So I'm going to go into our site here, and I can go into storage. And what I want to do is I want to create a new database, which is an Edge config. And inside of Edge config, what I want to do is I want to create this config. I'm going to put it into all environments. This is great. And what I really want to look at is this greeting hello world. So what's going on here is if I actually have greeting hello world, I can actually say like feature is on, and it can say true. Okay, so this is an object that I have access to. And if we go back to our middleware topic here, what we have inside of here is an Edge middleware. We actually have the ability to pull into Edge config. So we can say, okay, is feature on or off? I'm going to pull that. I'm going to pull that down from my Edge config, and that's request is going to happen before any of our actual application code loads. So we're going to be able to like write from there inside of our middleware, like, hey, I actually want to set a cookie for this that says that we really only want to show this feature. Or I want to have two different pages that show, and my Edge middleware is going to handle that logic that turns things on and off. So this is really useful for feature flags and A/B testing. What's also really cool about being inside of this Edge middleware, let's say you don't want to use Edge config, you can use any feature flag service, such as like Optimizely. We have some integrations with them and LaunchDarkly as well. Okay, and this is another great example. Hop into vercel.com/sales /contact/sales to kind of get some more out of that, so we can like dig into that some more with you. And I think we are at 10 till already. Anybody else has any other questions? Edge middleware is a feature of Vercel or Next. So with Next, that is a feature that you have. You can use, there's a number of different ways that we have access to that. So middleware.ts, but for our Edge middleware, this is our Vercel feature here. So I don't know how that actually gets instrumented, like if you were to use a different service provider, if they have an Edge middleware service, but if you use middleware.ts, that's going to get executed inside of Vercel when you deploy to us, no matter the plan. And I think that is it. And I super appreciate everyone's time. You guys have been awesome, awesome folks. We're going to send out the recording of this. I'm going to hang on for just another minute in case there's any other questions. Yeah, so again, vercel.com/contact/sales. This was really great. And I will go ahead. How about DSGVO of Edge in Europe? I'm not familiar with DSGVO. I do not know what that is, so I can't answer. I can't speak to that. But yeah, get in touch with us and we'll see what we can come up with.